You could drive down Maple Street 100 times and never notice the Collins house. It wasn't the smallest house on the block, nor the largest. It was a two-story colonial with tired white siding and shutters that once had been blue but now leaned toward gray. In summer, the flower beds sprouted marigolds if Margaret Collins had the energy to plant them. In winter, the walkway was cleared by the hands of her youngest son, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes not at all. It was the kind of place that blended into the Midwest landscape. Modest, lived in, quietly carrying the weight of an entire family's story. Margaret, though everyone in town called her Maggie, had lived there for 25 years. For the last 10, she had kept it afloat alone. A night shift nurse in her 50s, she walked the tiled corridors of St. Anne's Hospital while the rest of the town slept, her sneakers squeaking under fluorescent lights, her back aching in ways she never admitted to her children. She was 50 years old and had the kind of face that did not complain. Soft lines around the mouth from years of holding her tongue, tired eyes that still carried a glimmer of humor when someone needed cheering. Her husband, David, had left one unremarkable Tuesday, a decade ago. He didn't slam the door, didn't raise his voice. He simply gathered a duffel bag of shirts and left a note on the counter that said, "I can't do this anymore." He never came back. Maggie never spoke ill of him to the children. In the Midwest, you learn to live with storms by building stronger walls, not by cursing the rain. So Maggie built her walls, long shifts, double shifts, bills paid on time, and dinners reheated in the microwave when she returned at dawn. She had 3 children, and each was a story unto themselves. Ethan, the eldest, was 23 and studying law. He carried himself with the righteous intensity of someone who believed the world would be conquered by logic and precedent. Claire, the middle child, was 20, a sophomore in art school, her hair often streaked with colors Maggie pretended not to notice. Lucas, the youngest, was 16, still growing into his tall frame, his life revolving around basketball practices and the approval of his peers. The Collins family was what neighbors politely called getting by. The fridge was usually half full. The car had more miles than the moon, and vacations were things they watched in other people's photographs. But there was food on the table, clothes on their backs, and Maggie made sure birthdays never passed without a cake, even if it was from the discount aisle. What her children didn't know, because she wouldn't allow them to know, was how fragile the whole structure had become. Her heart had been misbehaving lately, fluttering in odd rhythms, leaving her lightheaded at the end of 12-hour shifts. The doctor had mentioned surgery. Maggie had shaken her head and walked out with a smile. Surgery was expensive. Surgery would mean weeks away from work, unpaid bills, threats of foreclosure. She couldn't risk it. She would not pile her burdens onto the shoulders of her children, not when they were just beginning to step into their own lives. So Maggie told no one, not Ethan, who would scold her with facts and figures, not Claire, who would draw tragic portraits of sacrifice and post them online, not Lucas, whose young eyes still needed to believe his mother was unbreakable. Maggie kept the truth sealed, as she always had, under the quiet armor of routine. There is a kind of silence mothers carry that is heavier than shouting. Maggie wore that silence like a second uniform. She rose at dusk, packed a thermos of coffee, kissed the air near her children's foreheads if they were home, and drove to the hospital. She returned at dawn, the sky bruised with morning, and slid into the house like a ghost. Sometimes she would pass Ethan bent over casebooks, or Claire asleep on the couch surrounded by sketchpads, or Lucas snoring with a basketball tucked under his arm. Maggie would pause, linger, and smile softly before retreating upstairs to sleep. But silence has cracks, even in the strongest walls. Ethan had begun to notice the bills stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. He knew enough about numbers to suspect they were overdue. Claire had overheard her mother on the phone with a collections agency, her voice calm but edged with weariness. Lucas had caught her one evening clutching her chest, dismissing it as indigestion when he asked. Each child saw a glimpse, but Maggie was quick to plaster the walls again, quick to reassure, quick to carry the weight herself. At 50, Maggie was the silent pillar of her family, the one who bore everything so others could lean. But even pillars crack when no one notices the strain. That winter, as snow buried the town in muffled white, the seeds of future conflicts were already sown inside that modest house on Maple Street. Ethan pushed harder in his studies, demanding financial support Maggie couldn't provide. Claire began to talk about moving to New York, chasing a life far from Ohio. Lucas, restless and stubborn, started staying out late, drawn into the orbit of older boys who drank in parked cars. And Maggie, who had built her identity on giving, found herself cornered by a truth she could no longer outrun. Her children were growing beyond her reach, and the secret she carried in her chest could undo everything she had worked to protect. For now, though, she folded the silence tighter around her like a blanket, poured herself another cup of coffee, and prepared for another night on the ward. Because mothers like Maggie do not collapse in daylight. They endure in shadows, in whispered prayers, in the small, unremarkable acts that hold a family together, even as the cracks begin to spread. Ethan liked to sit at the kitchen table with his casebook spread like a map of conquest. He had always been the kind of child who believed answers could be hunted down in the fine print. Even as a boy, he used to argue with teachers over grading rubrics, waving rulebooks in his hand as if justice were simply a matter of reading the manual. Now, at 23, with law school debts piling like snowdrifts, he carried himself with the air of a man who needed the world to be orderly, logical, fair. Law is how you fix broken things, he told Claire one night, tapping the margin of a textbook with his pen. Society is just a contract. You follow it and it works. Claire had rolled her eyes, tossing her paint-streaked hair over her shoulder. She didn't believe in contracts, she believed in colors. The table between them was cluttered with her sketch pads, edges curling with charcoal dust. She had drawn faces she couldn't forget: the stooped man at the bus stop, the weary woman at the grocery line, Lucas dribbling a ball in the driveway. She wanted to paint them all, hang them on walls taller than herself, in galleries where strangers would whisper her name. New York was her dream, a city that pulsed like a living canvas. Ohio, she insisted, was a place where dreams came to die quietly. You think everything's solvable with rules, she teased Ethan. But life's not a courtroom, it's a stage. And some of us refuse to play by someone else's script. Lucas, half listening from the corner, bounced a basketball against the living room wall, each thud a punctuation mark in their argument. At 16, he measured time not in hours but in games. Practice at 4, scrimmage at 7, drills until his arms burned. He wanted nothing more than to hear his name shouted in gymnasiums, to wear a jersey that meant escape from small-town anonymity. Scholarships, scouts, arenas, he dreamed in the rhythm of squeaking sneakers and roaring crowds. If Ethan's dream was built on logic and Claire's on rebellion, Lucas's was built on sweat. He wanted to sweat his way out of Ohio. Maggie watched them all from the stove, her back turned, a wooden spoon stirring soup that had more water than meat. She listened, though she rarely interrupted. To Ethan's certainty, she offered nods. To Claire's defiance, small smiles. To Lucas's pounding basketball, the occasional plea, "Not against the wall, honey, please." Her children's dreams were loud, brash, demanding. They took up space in the little house, filling it with arguments, laughter, slammed doors. Maggie's own dreams had long since gone quiet, tucked away like photographs in a shoebox. She wanted only to keep the roof steady and the lights on, yet every dream carried a price tag. Ethan's tuition was an avalanche waiting to fall. Claire's art school siphoned money that never seemed enough. Lucas's sneakers wore out faster than she could afford to replace them. Each child, in their own way, was reaching for the future, not realizing how thin the ground beneath them had become. It was Ethan who first noticed the cracks. He had a knack for numbers, even if they were not his subject of study. He saw the utility bills stacked on the counter, the envelopes with red lettering half hidden under grocery flyers. One night he approached Maggie with a polite but pointed tone. "Mom, are we okay with money?" Maggie's hands, rinsing dishes in warm water, didn't pause. "We're fine," she said simply. The words were smooth, practiced, like the reflex of a nurse who reassures patients even as alarms beep in the background. But Ethan wasn't convinced. "I could take on more loans," he pressed. "Or maybe," he hesitated, ashamed of the thought, "maybe I should get a job, delay law school." Maggie spun to face him, water dripping from her hands, her eyes fierce in the dim light. Absolutely not. You keep going. You finish what you started. That's your only job. Ethan backed down, but unease lingered. He saw his mother's exhaustion in the way she leaned on the counter after long shifts. He just didn't know the whole truth. Claire, meanwhile, was restless in different ways. She painted late into the night, sometimes at the kitchen table, sometimes in her bedroom where the smell of oils clung to the sheets. She felt suffocated by the sameness of Ohio, the familiar streets, the quiet neighbors, the predictability of days. One Saturday morning, she dropped the bomb. I'm applying to an art program in New York, full immersion. I'll figure out the money later. Lucas nearly choked on his cereal. Ethan scoffed, already calculating debts in his head. Maggie froze at the sink, her hands still holding a wet plate. New York, Maggie asked carefully. Yes, I can't stay here forever, Mom. I need to be somewhere that matters. This place, it'll swallow me. Her words stung, though she didn't mean them that way. For Maggie, Maple Street had been the battleground of survival, the ground where she kept her children safe when everything else fell apart. To hear her daughter dismiss it as a graveyard for dreams was a knife she swallowed silently. Lucas stayed mostly quiet in these exchanges, though his silence wasn't peace, it was hunger. He lived in highlight reels in his mind, the slam dunks he hadn't yet made, the scholarship letters he hadn't yet received. Every late night practice in the driveway was a step toward freedom. He wasn't interested in law arguments or art programs. His dream was simple and physical. Get out, play ball, make it big. But Maggie noticed the limps after practice, the swollen ankles hidden under long socks. Lucas waved it off with teenage bravado, but she knew. Dreams, too, could break the body. On a Sunday evening, the three siblings sat in the living room, each absorbed in their separate futures. Ethan highlighted case law, Claire sketched restless faces, Lucas dribbled a ball softly on the carpet. Maggie watched from her chair, her chest aching not only from her hidden condition but from the invisible threads pulling her children in different directions. She loved them fiercely, yet she felt them slipping away into courts, into galleries, into arenas, each chasing a dream that demanded more than she could give. And in that quiet, Maggie pressed her palm to her chest, steadying her breath. She whispered to herself words none of them could hear. Hold together just a little longer. Hold until they can stand on their own. Outside, the street lamps flickered on. Inside, the children dreamed loudly. And Maggie, silent as ever, carried the weight of their futures like a pillar no one noticed until it cracked. Dinner had always been Maggie's ritual of reassurance. No matter how exhausted she was from the hospital, no matter how many bills she shuffled in her purse, she made sure there was a meal on the table by 6:30. It wasn't gourmet. Most nights it was pasta or meatloaf stretched with breadcrumbs or chicken thighs simmered in cream of mushroom soup. But it was warm and it was shared, and to Maggie that meant survival. That evening, she served spaghetti with jarred sauce, topped with a little grated cheese from a green can. Ethan slid his casebooks aside, reluctantly, to make room on the table. Claire set her sketchpad down but left her pencils scattered like soldiers on retreat. Lucas came in late, hair damp with sweat, a basketball still under his arm. They ate with the usual noise of forks clinking against plates, the TV murmuring faintly in the background. For a while, there was only chewing, the occasional scrape of a chair, Maggie's soft reminders to use napkins. Then Ethan cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said, his voice carrying the weight of an argument already prepared. Law school tuition is climbing again next semester. I don't want to take out more loans unless I have to. Maggie, twirling spaghetti around her fork, forced a smile. We'll figure it out. That's just it, Ethan pressed. I don't see how we're figuring anything out. I checked the bursar's office. They said payments are late. Mom, are you behind? Claire set her fork down with a clink. Lucas looked up from his plate, Maggie's hands stilled. For a moment the room was held by silence, the kind that thickens like steam. We're fine, Maggie answered finally. Her tone was steady, almost rehearsed. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it? Ethan's brows drew tight. Mom, this isn't some grocery bill. It's tens of thousands of dollars. I need to know what's happening. Claire leaned in, her voice tinged with exasperation. Here we go again, the savior complex. Maybe not everything has to revolve around your law school dreams, Ethan. Some of us are trying to live our own lives. Ethan turned on her sharp. And what life is that, Claire? Chasing art programs you can't pay for? Running off to New York with nothing but a sketchbook? That's not a plan, that's a dream? Claire snapped, cheeks flushing. At least I'm not hiding behind casebooks, pretending I can fix the world with statutes and footnotes. The air in the kitchen thickened. Lucas slumped in his chair, bouncing his basketball softly against his shin, as if the rhythm might drown out the rising storm. Maggie's chest tightened. She tried to interject. Please just eat. But Ethan cut her off. No, Mom, we can't keep pretending everything's fine. You're working yourself into the ground and the bills keep coming. What's the plan? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like there isn't one. Maggie's fork trembled in her hand. The plan is to get through today, Ethan. That's the plan. It came out sharper than she intended, and the words hung in the air like broken glass. Claire blinked at her mother, startled. Lucas finally dropped his ball, the thud echoing across the linoleum. For the first time in years, Maggie felt her composure slip. She had spent a decade patching holes, smoothing tempers, absorbing blows. Tonight, her armor cracked. Do you think I don't know what things cost? She said, her voice rising. Do you think I haven't counted every dollar, every hour of overtime, every night I've come home so tired I can barely climb the stairs? Do you think I don't lie awake wondering how to keep this house standing? The children stared. They had rarely seen her like this, her voice quivering, her eyes glistening with tears she usually swallowed before anyone noticed. I've given everything I have, Maggie continued, softer now but no less fierce. And all I ask is that you eat your dinner without tearing each other, or me, apart. Silence fell heavy. Ethan's jaw tightened, his sense of control slipping. Claire lowered her eyes, doodling invisible lines on the table with her fingertip. Lucas pushed his plate away, muttering, "This is why I hate eating here." He stood abruptly, grabbing his basketball, and stomped upstairs. The thump of his door closing reverberated like a verdict. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, guilt flickering across his face. Claire blinked back tears, staring at the spaghetti she no longer wanted. Maggie sat in her chair, shoulders sagging, her breath uneven. Her heart thudded in its uneven rhythm, a secret she dared not share. She pressed a hand discreetly to her chest, willing it to steady, praying her children didn't notice. Dinner's over, she whispered, rising to gather plates with trembling fingers. The children didn't move to stop her. They sat in silence, each consumed by their own stubbornness, their own dreams, their own inability to see the cracks widening beneath the weight of what was unspoken. In the sink, water ran over ceramic, and Maggie let it wash the tears she refused to cry. Upstairs, Lucas blasted music to drown out the world. In the dining room, Ethan and Claire sat across from one another, wordless, their forks abandoned. And in that small Ohio house, what had once been a shared table became a battlefield of dreams, debts, and silence. The first fractures had formed, invisible but irreversible, spreading quietly through the foundation Maggie had fought so hard to keep standing. That night, long after the plates were washed and the house had fallen into its separate silences, Maggie lay awake in the dark. The ceiling fan ticked overhead, blades turning slowly as if dragging the weight of memory with each rotation. Sleep wouldn't come. Not after the dinner table had cracked beneath her children's arguments, not after she'd felt her own voice break in ways she'd promised herself it never would. Instead, she let her mind wander back to a day she rarely allowed herself to revisit. The day David left. It had been a Tuesday. Tuesdays never promised anything special, just the in-between of a week. Maggie had been folding laundry on the couch, the smell of detergent still clinging to the shirts, when she noticed David moving around the bedroom with unusual precision. He wasn't humming the way he sometimes did. He wasn't chatting idly about the Cavaliers' game or the weather. He was folding clothes into a duffel bag, his motions clipped, determined. "Where are you going?" she'd asked, standing in the doorway, a half-folded towel in her hand. He hadn't looked up. "I can't do this anymore." The words were simple, almost careless, but they sliced through her like glass. She thought at first he meant the shift he had at the factory, or maybe the long overtime hours that had left him exhausted. but then he zipped the bag, turned, and she saw it in his eyes, a vacancy, a decision already made. David, she whispered, the kids, they'll be fine. He slung the strap over his shoulder, brushing past her. Fine, she wanted to scream. Ethan is 13, Claire is 10, Lucas is 6, fine, but the scream never came. She swallowed it like she swallowed so many things in those years because screaming would not stop him from walking out the door. He left a note on the counter. 6 words. I can't do this anymore. He didn't explain what this was. Marriage? Fatherhood? The weight of a family that required more than his hands wanted to give. Maggie never told the children the details. She folded the towel in her hand, placed it neatly in the basket, and when Ethan asked why Dad's car wasn't in the driveway, she said, he needs some time. When Claire cried herself to sleep, Maggie rubbed circles on her back until the sobs quieted. When Lucas, only 6, asked if Daddy was mad at him, Maggie kissed his forehead and said no. The truth sat like a stone in her stomach, but she never served it to her children. They were too young to carry it. She would carry it alone. The early years after David left were a blur of exhaustion. Maggie picked up double shifts at the hospital, coming home so tired she sometimes fell asleep in her uniform. She kept a small notebook in her purse where she tracked every cent: groceries, utility bills, the mortgage. Each page was proof of her survival, the ledger of a life balanced on a knife's edge. She still remembered the first Christmas without him. The kids had written wish lists with hopeful handwriting. A new basketball for Lucas, art supplies for Claire, a used laptop for Ethan. Maggie couldn't give them everything, but she worked extra hours, skipped meals, and on Christmas morning there were gifts under the tree, wrapped in newspaper when she couldn't afford wrapping paper. The children's faces lit up, and for a moment, the absence of their father was softened by the glow of a mother who refused to let the holiday go dark. But Maggie remembered, too, the nights alone at the kitchen table. The silence after the children had gone to bed. The way the house creaked, emptier somehow, as if the walls themselves grieved. She would sit with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the note David left, folded and refolded until the paper was soft as cloth. 6 words that had rewritten her life. She never remarried. Suitors came and went, a fellow nurse who brought her flowers, a neighbor who offered to help fix the porch steps, but Maggie's heart had closed itself, not out of bitterness but out of focus. Her life was no longer hers. It belonged to Ethan, Claire, and Lucas. Every hour she worked, every dollar she saved, every sacrifice she made was poured into their futures. Now, lying awake in her bed a decade later, Maggie pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the uneven thump of her heart. It frightened her, though she would never admit it. What scared her most wasn't dying. It was leaving her children before they were ready, the way David had left her. She thought of Ethan, so certain that law would solve the world. She thought of Claire, desperate to paint her way out of Ohio. She thought of Lucas, slamming doors and dribbling basketballs like each bounce was a rebellion. They didn't know the ledger she still carried in her mind. They didn't know the medical file folded at the back of her drawer, where the words "surgery recommended" glared at her in black ink. They didn't know how thin the walls of the house really were, how fragile the foundation of their lives. And Maggie, faithful, stubborn Maggie, would not tell them. She rolled onto her side, listening to the muffled music leaking from Lucas's room upstairs, the scratch of Claire's pencil in hers, the faint shuffle of Ethan's footsteps as he paced with his casebooks. They were all awake, each in their own world, each carrying their own restless dreams. Maggie closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, as if speaking to the ghost of David who had long since vanished. I can do this, I have to. But her voice cracked on the last word. Because the truth, the unspoken truth, was that even pillars grow weary. And Maggie was beginning to crumble beneath the weight. The next weeks passed in fragments, snow melting into slush, gray skies pressing low, the days moving forward while Maggie felt herself lagging behind. The dinner table still bore the aftertaste of that argument. Ethan was polite but clipped. Claire withdrew into sketches and headphones, and Lucas was slipping away. He started missing curfews, coming home with the smell of cigarettes clinging to his hoodie, though he swore he hadn't touched one. His sneakers scuffed louder than usual on the steps when he climbed the stairs late at night. Maggie tried to set rules, but rules are brittle things when held against the stubbornness of a 16-year-old determined to carve out his own rebellion. "Where were you?" she asked one Friday when he stumbled in past midnight, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes bright with something she couldn't name. "Out," he muttered, shrugging off his jacket. "Out where?" "With friends." "What friends?" "The kind you don't know," he snapped and brushed past her before she could press further. His bedroom door slammed shut, rattling the picture frames in the hallway. Maggie stood in the quiet, her chest heavy with both worry and the ache of her unsteady heart. She wanted to run after him, to demand answers, but exhaustion pinned her in place. Instead, she whispered a prayer to the silence, the same one she had whispered 1,000 times before: keep them safe. Just keep them safe. Lucas's restlessness only grew. At school, teachers reported skipped classes, half-finished homework. He still poured himself into basketball, but his grades sagged, and the coach warned Maggie that he might be benched if things didn't improve. Basketball was his lifeline, his one clear dream of escape, yet he seemed determined to test how close he could stand to the edge of losing it. One evening, Maggie found him in the driveway, shooting hoops under the weak glow of the street lamp. The ball echoed against the pavement in sharp, angry rhythms. She wrapped her sweater tighter around herself and stepped outside. "You'll freeze out here," she said gently. Lucas kept dribbling. Better than being in there. In where? The house, the arguing, the constant stress, it's suffocating. Maggie swallowed hard. "We're doing our best, I'm doing my best." He launched the ball, missed, cursed under his breath. "Your best isn't enough, Mom." The words struck harder than any basketball. Maggie felt them land in her chest, heavier than her heart could bear. For a moment, she wanted to scream back, to tell him about the nights she nearly collapsed at the hospital, about the stack of bills she hid in a drawer, about the diagnosis that whispered of surgery. But she couldn't, she wouldn't. Instead, she said softly, "You think I don't know that?" Lucas froze, ball in hand, his breath visible in the cold. He glanced at her, startled by the crack in her voice. But he didn't answer. He just turned, grabbed his jacket, and disappeared into the house, leaving the basketball rolling away down the driveway until it bumped against her feet. Maggie bent slowly, picked it up, and held it against her chest as if it were a fragile thing. Inside, Ethan was at the table, poring over case notes. He looked up at his mother with faint irritation. "You need to be tougher on him," he said flatly. "He's 16, not 6. If you don't put your foot down now, he'll walk all over you." Claire, sketching on the couch, shot her brother a glare. "Oh, please, you think Mom hasn't been tough enough? She's been holding this family together since Dad left. Maybe Lucas just needs someone to listen to him, not more rules." Ethan scoffed. "Listening won't fix his grades. Listening won't keep him out of trouble." "Neither will lecturing," Claire fired back. The argument spiraled quickly, voices rising like storm winds. Maggie wanted to shout at them both, to silence the noise, but her chest tightened again, a warning flutter under her ribs. She pressed a hand there quietly, hoping they wouldn't notice. She set the basketball down by the door and whispered, "Enough, please." The room fell quiet, but the fracture lines had already spread, invisible yet unrelenting. Ethan returned to his notes, Claire to her sketchpad, Lucas to the safety of his locked bedroom. Each child retreated to their own corner, leaving Maggie standing in the middle, the weary pillar straining under the weight. Later that night, she sat alone at the kitchen table. The bills were there again, stacked neatly, unopened envelopes with urgent stamps in red. She rubbed her temples, fighting the dizziness that came more often these days. On the fridge, pinned by a magnet shaped like a heart, hung a schedule Lucas had written at the start of the season. Practice times, game nights. The date of the regional tournament circled in blue. He had once been so proud of it, showing her every detail. Now he barely mentioned basketball at all. Maggie stared at the circle, wondering how much longer she could hold things together before the cracks widened beyond repair. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, Maggie sat in the dim glow of the kitchen light, her shoulders bent, her heart pounding its uneven rhythm. The pillar was still standing, but the foundation beneath it was beginning to give way. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that began without warning bells. Maggie had worked another double shift, trudging home in the thin gray light of morning. She brewed a pot of coffee, forced herself through a grocery run, and stood in the kitchen that afternoon chopping onions for dinner. Her body felt heavier than usual, her breath shallow. Claire was the first to notice. She had been sprawled on the couch with her sketch pad, earbuds in, when she caught the sound of a knife clattering against the cutting board. She pulled one bud out, frowning. "Mom?" Maggie tried to answer, but her voice caught in her throat. The room tilted. The onion slipped from her hand, rolling onto the floor. She gripped the edge of the counter, eyes wide, and then, without drama, without even a cry, her legs gave out beneath her. "Mom!" Claire's scream tore through the house. Ethan thundered down the stairs, books scattering behind him. Lucas yanked open his bedroom door, basketball in hand, eyes wide with alarm. They found their mother collapsed on the kitchen floor, her face pale, her chest rising in shallow, uneven pulls. Ethan dropped to his knees. "Call 911. "I've got it." Claire fumbled for her phone, hands shaking. Lucas hovered, frozen, until Ethan barked at him. "Get a pillow under her head now." It felt like forever, but within minutes, sirens wailed outside, red lights splashing across the walls of their modest home. Paramedics swept in, efficient and calm, checking Maggie's vitals, asking questions her children couldn't answer. Blood pressure, pulse, oxygen levels, all numbers that painted a truth no one in that kitchen wanted to face. "She needs to come with us," one medic said. "Now." The ride to the hospital was a blur. Claire clutched Maggie's purse in her lap. Ethan sat stiffly, jaw clenched, every rational thought in his law-trained mind dissolving into fear. Lucas pressed his forehead against the cool window, blinking back tears he would not let anyone see. At St. Anne's, the same hospital where Maggie had walked endless corridors, she was wheeled not as nurse but as patient. Gowned, monitored, vulnerable. Her children followed down the hallway like shadows. Hours later, a doctor met them in a small consultation room with walls painted the color of calm that never quite worked. He spoke in measured tones, his hands folded, his words careful but firm. "Your mother has a heart condition. It's been progressing for some time. She's in what we would consider late-stage heart disease. She's been hiding the symptoms, but her heart can't keep carrying the strain. She needs surgery soon." The words dropped like stones. Ethan blinked, trying to frame questions, but his voice faltered. "Surgery? Why didn't she tell us?" Claire's throat tightened. She never says when she's hurting." Lucas slammed his fist against the arm of his chair. "She lied. She's been lying this whole time." The doctor raised a hand gently. "She's been trying to protect you. That's what parents do, but this is no longer something she can carry alone." When at last they were allowed into her room, Maggie lay against white sheets, her skin pale against the fabric. She stirred when they entered, forcing a weak smile. "Don't look so worried," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's just a little bump in the road." "A bump?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Mom, you collapsed. They said you need surgery." Maggie looked away, shame washing over her. "I didn't want to scare you." "Scare us?" Claire's eyes brimmed. "Do you know what it was like watching you fall like that? You scared us more by saying nothing." Lucas stood at the foot of the bed, fists clenched, jaw trembling. He couldn't bring himself to speak. Instead, he stared at the heart monitor, each beep echoing the uneven truth of the woman who had held their family together. Maggie reached for his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I thought if I just pushed through, it would be enough, but maybe I was wrong." The three of them crowded close then, Ethan gripping her hand as though sheer will could stabilize her, Claire pressing her head against her mother's shoulder, Lucas finally letting the tears spill. For the first time, the children saw their mother not as the unshakable pillar, but as a woman, tired, fragile, breakable. And for the first time, Maggie allowed herself to be seen that way. The days that followed blurred into hospital visits and whispered conversations in the hall. The surgeon explained the risks, the recovery, the costs. Numbers piled up like storm clouds. Medical bills, weeks of lost wages, mortgage deadlines. Ethan scribbled figures on scraps of paper, trying to calculate a solvable equation. Claire drew sketches of her mother in the hospital bed, lines trembling on the page. Lucas sat silent, arms crossed, eyes red from nights without sleep. The foundation of their lives had cracked wide open. What once was hidden now stood in plain view. Maggie's sacrifice had come at the cost of her own body. And though she smiled through the pain, though she reassured them with the same words she had always used, "We'll be fine, we'll figure it out," her children knew the truth. The pillar was faltering. If they didn't act, the whole house might come down. The first night Maggie came home from the hospital, the house felt different. It wasn't just the scent of antiseptic that still clung to her sweater or the pale exhaustion in her face. It was the way her children hovered. Ethan brought her water without being asked. Claire tucked blankets around her shoulders. Lucas sat stiffly in the corner, arms crossed as if guarding something fragile. By Thursday, Maggie insisted on making dinner. She shuffled around the kitchen, moving slowly, her breath steady but shallow. She boiled pasta, warmed bread in the oven. It was her way of pretending normalcy, of reassuring herself that life hadn't slipped entirely out of her hands. But the children knew. They had sat with the doctors. They had heard the word surgery. That evening, the table was set with mismatched plates and flickering candles Claire had found in a drawer. Maggie placed the food before them with a smile too thin to hide the tremor in her hands. "See, just like always," she said softly. Dinner together. For a few moments, there was only the clink of silverware. Then Ethan set his fork down, his jaw tight. "We need to sell the house." The words landed heavy like a stone dropped in water. Claire's head snapped up. "What?" Ethan leaned forward, his tone clipped with urgency. "It's the only way. Mom needs surgery. Surgery costs money. We don't have it. Selling the house would cover the bills and give us breathing room." Claire pushed her plate away. "You can't be serious. This house is all we have. Every memory, every piece of dad that's left, it's here. You can't just sell it like it's a used car." "It's just a building," Ethan shot back. "Mom's life is more important than walls and windows." Maggie tried to interrupt. "Please, let's not." But Claire's voice rose. "You always reduce everything to numbers and contracts. This isn't a courtroom, Ethan. This is our family." "And what's your plan, Claire?" Ethan demanded. "Paint our way out of debt, sell sketches for hospital bills, grow up. Dreams don't pay surgeons." Claire's cheeks burned. "I'll drop out. I'll get a job. I don't care if I ever see New York. I'll do whatever it takes, but I won't let you erase this home." "Drop out?" Ethan slammed his hand against the table. "Do you hear yourself? Mom has sacrificed her entire life for us, and you want to throw away your future on top of it? That's not noble, that's selfish." The room shook with the force of their words. Lucas, silent until now, shoved his chair back with a screech. "You're both wrong." They turned to him startled. His eyes blazed, fists clenched at his sides. "You think this is about houses or schools? You think Mom cares about any of that? She's dying. She's been lying to us for years, and we didn't see it. We were too busy chasing our own crap. Law school, art school, basketball. None of it matters if she's gone." His voice cracked. He slammed his palm against his chest. "I'll quit the team. I'll get a job at the diner or the gas station or whatever. I don't care. Forget scouts, forget scholarships. I'm done." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. Her fork clattered to her plate. "Stop it!" Her voice, sharp and desperate, cut through the storm. The children froze. Maggie's eyes glistened with tears that spilled freely now, no longer hidden behind smiles. "I won't let you do this," she said, trembling. "I won't let you destroy your futures for me. Do you hear me? I gave everything I had so you wouldn't have to. And now you sit here, throwing your dreams onto the fire as if that will save me. It won't. It will only make every sacrifice I made worthless." The silence that followed was louder than any shouting. Ethan stared at his mother, words tangled in his throat. Claire's eyes filled with tears, guilt pooling like ink. Lucas dropped his gaze, shoulders slumping, anger dissolving into sorrow. Maggie pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. Her voice softened, but her resolve did not. "All I ever wanted was for you to stand on your own, to go further than I ever could. I didn't keep this house alive for me. I kept it alive for you, and if you give up your dreams because of me, then I failed." Her words broke something open in the room. Ethan lowered his eyes, shame heavy on his shoulders. Claire's tears slid down her cheeks, silent but unstoppable. Lucas leaned against the wall, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. For the first time, the children saw their mother not as the unshakable pillar, but as a woman who refused to let them carry her burden, even if it killed her. Dinner ended in quiet, plates half finished, bread gone cold. The storm had passed, but the cracks it left behind ran deep. Upstairs, doors closed softly. Downstairs, Maggie sat alone at the table, the candles flickering low. She touched the edge of the tablecloth, the same one she had bought years ago when David was still home, and whispered into the stillness. Please, let them understand before it's too late. The house creaked in reply, old wood groaning under the weight of silence. The days after the stormy dinner were thick with silence. The kind of silence that clings to the walls, that hums under conversations cut short. Ethan buried himself deeper into books, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. Claire sketched late into the night, her drawings darker, lines heavier, almost violent. And Lucas pulled further away, a storm cloud with no horizon. He stopped coming home on time. Sometimes he skipped dinner altogether. Maggie would hear the back door creak at midnight, then again at 3 in the morning. She lay in bed, her hand pressed against her chest, waiting for the sound of his footsteps returning, her body torn between exhaustion and terror. One Tuesday, the phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Maggie was folding laundry at the kitchen table, the hum of the dryer still in her ears. Mrs. Collins? The voice was tight, official. This is Principal Harris from Eastwood High. I'm afraid we need you to come down right away. There's been an incident involving your son. The laundry slipped from her lap. When she arrived at the school, the parking lot was dotted with police cruisers, their lights muted but their presence undeniable. Inside, voices echoed through the corridor, stern, measured, impatient. Maggie hurried down the hall, her breath catching in shallow bursts. She found Lucas in the principal's office, slouched in a chair, a split lip and defiance carved into his young face. Across from him sat a boy with a swollen eye and a parent with clenched fists. What happened? Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Your son assaulted another student, Principal Harris said flatly. There was a fight in the locker room, it escalated. Lucas snapped his head up. He shoved me first. He was trash-talking, calling you names. I wasn't gonna let him. Lucas, Maggie's voice cracked. Enough. The parent of the other boy glared. Your kid is violent. He should be suspended, maybe worse. The officer in the corner spoke next, voice clipped. We're letting him off with a warning this time, but if it happens again, he'll be charged. Do you understand, ma'am? Maggie nodded, her hands trembling so hard she had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. When the room cleared, it was just her and Lucas. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. I was defending you, he muttered. Maggie sank into the chair across from him, her chest tight. Defending me? By throwing punches in a locker room. Do you think that helps me? Do you think that saves me? He looked up then, anger flashing with tears he refused to let fall. I didn't know what else to do. I feel like I'm drowning, Mom. You're sick, Ethan's acting like a robot, Claire's off in her own world, and I don't know where to put it all. So yeah, I fought. I'm sorry, but I don't know what else to do. Maggie reached for his hand. He flinched at first, then let her hold it. You're 16, whispered. You're not supposed to carry this. None of you are, that's my job. Her chest tightened sharply then, a jolt that stole her breath. She gripped the edge of the chair, eyes widening. Mom, Lucas's voice broke. What's happening? She tried to steady herself, but the flutter in her chest grew violent, her pulse racing, her breath shallow. The room tilted. Mom, Lucas sprang up, catching her before she slid from the chair. Panic filled his eyes, louder than any siren. Help somebody, please? Teachers rushed in, the officer returned, voices blurred. An ambulance was called. As they wheeled her out on a stretcher, Maggie caught Lucas's terrified face, streaked with tears. She reached weakly for him, her voice barely a whisper. This isn't your fault. But Lucas shook his head violently, clutching her hand until the paramedics pried him away. Don't say that, don't you dare say that. Back at St. Anne's, Maggie was admitted again. The doctor's words were heavier this time, edged with urgency. She can't delay surgery any longer. If she does, the risk of heart failure is imminent. In the waiting room, Ethan paced like a trapped animal, muttering about finances and options that didn't exist. Claire sat with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, sketches abandoned. Lucas hunched in a chair, face buried in his hands, whispering apologies to no one. The cracks had widened. The pillar that held them all was breaking. And for the first time, the children realized. If they didn't find a way to stand together, they might lose the very foundation of their lives. The hospital waiting room was nearly empty by the time the three siblings found themselves alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the vending machine hummed in the corner, and their mother was behind a set of double doors, tethered to monitors and doctors' decisions. For a long time, none of them spoke. Ethan paced in slow, tight circles, running his hand through his hair until it stuck up in jagged lines. Claire sat curled into herself, her knees pulled close, her sketchbook lying unopened on her lap. Lucas hunched forward in a plastic chair, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor with red, swollen eyes. Finally, it was Claire who broke the silence. Her voice was thin, trembling. She almost died tonight. No one argued. Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes burning with a frustration that masked fear. She needs surgery. That's not optional anymore. The doctor was clear, but how do we pay for it? That's the question. Claire shook her head. Money can't be the only thing we talk about, Ethan. She's not a spreadsheet. She's our mom. I know that. Ethan snapped, then softened. God, of course I know that, but if we don't find a way to cover the costs, the surgery doesn't happen. That's reality. Lucas lifted his head, his voice hoarse. I'll quit basketball. The words landed like a confession. Both Ethan and Claire turned to him, startled. I'll get a job at the diner, the grocery store, whatever. If I stop playing, I can work, bring money in. His jaw clenched, tears threatening again. I don't care about scholarships anymore. What's the point of college ball if she's not around to see it? Claire reached out, touched his arm gently. Lucas, you can't give that up. It's your dream. So what? He shot back. Dreams don't matter if she's gone. Ethan's voice cut in, steady, rational, almost cold. We all have to make sacrifices. Maybe it's not just you, Lucas. Maybe it's all of us. Claire's eyes flashed. What are you saying? I'm saying, Ethan began carefully, that maybe I defer law school for a year, get a job, save money, help pay for the surgery. I can go back later. It's not the end of the world. Claire blinked at him, stunned. Ethan had been unyielding about his path, his dream carved in stone. To hear him bend even slightly was a shock. Are you serious? She whispered. He nodded slowly. If it keeps her alive, yeah, I'm serious. For the first time that night, the three of them looked at one another, not as adversaries, not as dreamers pulling in opposite directions, but as children bound by the same tether, facing the same loss. Claire swallowed hard, then spoke. Then I'll give up New York. Ethan frowned. Claire, don't. No, listen. Her voice steadied, though her eyes brimmed. I've been selfish, chasing galleries and city lights while Mom was working herself sick. I can take a leave from school. Find work here, stay close. She needs us, all of us right now, and I want to be here. The weight of her words filled the room. Lucas shook his head in disbelief. We're all just giving up everything? No, Ethan said firmly. We're not giving up, we're choosing. For once, we're choosing her over ourselves. She's been choosing us every single day for 10 years. Maybe it's our turn. Silence stretched, heavy but different this time, less suffocating. More like an agreement unspoken but understood. Claire broke it with a shaky laugh. She'll hate this, you know. If she hears we're planning to sacrifice our futures, she'll scream at us from that hospital bed. Lucas let out a small, broken smile. Yeah, she'll probably throw a pillow at me. For the first time in weeks, they all laughed, soft, weary, but together. Ethan sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. So it's decided. We each do what we can. We work. We save. We make sure she gets that surgery. No excuses. Claire reached for their hands. Ethan hesitated, then clasped hers. Lucas added his, rough with calluses from basketball. 3 hands stacked in a fragile pact. She carried us this far, Claire whispered. Now we carry her. From down the hall, a monitor beeped faintly, a reminder of the urgency pressing against them. But in that waiting room, for the first time in years, the Collins children were united, not by dreams pulling them apart, but by love pulling them back together. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows, but inside, a fragile warmth flickered. The choice had been made. And though Maggie didn't know it yet, her children had decided to give her the very thing she had always denied herself, a family willing to carry the weight with her. The morning of the surgery began quietly, as if the world itself held its breath. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the parking lot of St. Anne's in soft white, muting the crunch of footsteps and the hum of car engines. Maggie was prepped in a small room with pale blue curtains and the steady hiss of oxygen. She wore a paper gown, thin against the chill, her hair tucked beneath a cap. Lines snaked from her arms, monitors blinked in green rhythms, each beep a reminder that her heart, her fragile heart, still fought to hold on. Her children stood around the bed, trying to hide their fear in different ways. Ethan held a clipboard of hospital forms, his hands shaking as he signed his name on lines meant for next of kin. Claire gripped Maggie's hand, her thumb tracing small circles against the pale skin, as if her touch alone could anchor her mother to this world. Lucas shifted from foot to foot, restless, clutching a basketball keychain he'd carried in his pocket, the only thing he could think to bring. Maggie smiled at them, her lips trembling. Look at you three, you'd think I was off to war, not surgery. It feels like both, Ethan muttered, his voice rough. Mom, Claire whispered, tears welling. Promise me you'll fight. Maggie squeezed her hand. I've been fighting my whole life, sweetheart. This time I'll let someone else fight for me. Lucas finally found his voice. Oh, it cracked. I'm sorry, Mom, for the fights, the late nights, the trouble. Maggie reached for him with surprising strength. No apologies, Lucas. None of you owe me a thing. You're my life's work, my proudest thing. If this is it, her voice faltered, then steadied. If this is it, no, I've already won. Don't say that, Ethan snapped, but his eyes blurred as he said it. The surgical team entered then, voices professional, faces unreadable. It's time. They wheeled her away, her children following until the double doors swung shut, leaving them on the other side. The silence that fell was deafening. The waiting began. The three of them sat in stiff chairs, side by side, in a hallway that smelled of coffee and antiseptic. For once, there were no arguments, no debates about law or art or basketball, just siblings bound by fear leaning into one another. Ethan clasped his hands so tightly his knuckles whitened. What if something goes wrong? Claire lined her head against his shoulder. Then we pick up the pieces together. Lucas hunched forward, staring at the floor. I can't lose her, I can't. Claire reached across and took his hand. Ethan hesitated, then added his, their hands stacked in a silent vow. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, their updates brief, clinical. She's stable. The team is working. We'll keep you posted. Each phrase was a lifeline they clung to, though none fully eased the weight in their chests. At one point, Ethan rose to pace, his shoes squeaking against the tile. Claire pulled out her sketchbook, drawing the curve of a heart monitor line. Lucas closed his eyes, mouthing prayers he didn't know he remembered. When the surgeon finally appeared, the world seemed to tilt. He removed his cap, his expression solemn but not grim. She's out of surgery. It went well. There were some complications, but she's stable now. The next 48 hours will be critical. She'll need rest, care, and time. But for now, she's with us. Relief flooded the hallway like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan exhaled so hard he nearly collapsed into his chair. Claire pressed her hands to her face, sobbing openly. Lucas let out a sound between a laugh and a cry, the basketball keychain rattling in his pocket as he doubled over. Can we see her? Ethan asked, voice raw. The surgeon nodded. Briefly. She'll be groggy, but she'll know you're there. They filed into the recovery room, hearts pounding. Maggie lay against white sheets, pale but breathing steady, her chest rising in rhythm with the steady beep of machines. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy but warm. There you are, she whispered. Claire bent over her, tears falling freely. We're here, Mom, we're not going anywhere. Ethan gripped her hand, the one that had signed every school permission slip, every check stretched too thin. You scared us half to death. I scare myself sometimes, Maggie murmured, a weak smile flickering. Lucas leaned close, holding up the basketball keychain. I kept this with me, for luck, for you? Her eyes softened. My boy. She brushed her thumb across his knuckles. In that room, with the hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic, something shifted. The fractures that had spread through their family seemed for a moment to knit back together. Not perfectly, scars would always remain, but strong enough to hold. For the first time, the children understood what it meant to be the pillar. Not to carry everything alone, but to stand together, even when the weight was unbearable. Maggie closed her eyes again, drifting into the heavy sleep of recovery. The children sat close, their chairs pulled tight around the bed, unwilling to let her out of their sight. Outside, snow kept falling, covering the world in white. Inside, for the Collins family, the storm had not ended, but for the first time they faced it side by side. The days after the surgery were measured not in hours, but in heartbeats. Every beep of the monitor, every breath Maggie drew, was a small miracle her children counted with silent gratitude. They took turns at her bedside, Ethan reading his casebook softly aloud, Claire sketching her mother's profile as she slept, Lucas holding her hand and whispering updates about school and basketball, as if normal conversation could anchor her to life. Slowly, Maggie grew stronger. Her cheeks regained color, her voice steadied, and though her steps were cautious, she walked the hospital halls with determination. When she was finally discharged, the snow had begun to thaw, patches of earth peeking through the white. At home, the Collins house felt new, though nothing in it had changed. The same worn sofa, the same chipped dishes, the same hum of the furnace. But there was a shift in the air, an unspoken vow that they would not return to the silences that had nearly broken them. Ethan adjusted his plans. He deferred one semester of law school and took a clerk's job downtown. For the first time, his work wasn't just about himself, but about helping keep the family steady. He carried groceries into the house with the same seriousness he once reserved for legal arguments. Claire stayed closer too. She transferred to a local art program, taking commissions from neighbors, sketching portraits of families, children, even pets. She found that art didn't require skyscrapers or galleries. It required honesty, the kind that bloomed inside her own home. And Lucas returned to the court, not to escape, but to honor. He still chased the dream of scholarships, but his game was different now. He played with a fire that wasn't about leaving, but about showing his mother what her sacrifice had built: resilience, discipline, hope. Maggie herself changed most of all. She still worked, but fewer hours. She let herself rest. She learned slowly to let her children carry her sometimes, the way she had carried them for so long. And in the quiet moments, sitting on the porch with a mug of tea, watching snow melt into streams, she realized she no longer stood alone as the pillar. The children had become her foundation. One Sunday afternoon, they gathered in the backyard, a rare day of sunlight breaking through the Ohio winter. Ethan grilled burgers, carefully following a recipe he read online. Claire spread out a blanket, arranging paper and pencils to capture the light. Lucas shot hoops in the driveway, the rhythmic bounce of the ball echoing like a heartbeat. Maggie sat in her chair, wrapped in a shawl, smiling at the simple scene. It wasn't grand, it wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. A family not defined by what they had lost, but by what they had chosen to build together. She thought back to the night David had walked out, leaving only a note. For years she believed she alone had to carry everything he abandoned. But now, watching her children laugh, argue, and lie, she understood something deeper. Family wasn't about never breaking. It was about breaking and still finding a way to heal. As the sun dipped low, casting the yard in golden light, Maggie whispered to herself and perhaps to the universe, "This is enough, more than enough." And it was. Glowing star, dear readers, thank you for walking with the Collins family through their journey of sacrifice, struggle, and healing. This story is a reminder that behind every quiet act of love, behind every sleepless night, there is a strength that binds families together. May you hold close the people you love. May you find peace in forgiveness, courage in hardship, and joy in the small, ordinary moments that make a family whole. From my heart to yours, I wish you health, happiness, and a home filled with love.